What's up, sound ninjas and ninjettes? Again, this is attempt number 2, and hopefully my audio is not crackly this time. So today we're talking about front of house versus broadcast. And we're going to talk about what the difference is between mixing front of house and mixing broadcast, some of the changes you need to make going back and forth when you're mixing one or the other. Sometimes you're mixing both at the same time, and that's challenging, but I've got some solutions for that as well. You just have to compromise or get an awesome PA that's really well tuned, but we'll talk about that another time. So today we're talking about the differences between front of house and broadcast. If you're new here, I'd invite you, go ahead and hit subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified every time I post a new video and go live like this. I'm not quite at the place where I can do this on a very regular schedule, but I'd like to be, and you'll get notified every time it happens. So hopefully you've got that. Thank you for letting me know that I am much better sounding this time. It is really embarrassing being an audio guy with bad audio. So thanks for that. Today, we're talking about creating worship environments with front of house and broadcast, and what are the most important things, or what are the main differences, the ways that you have to mix differently from one to the other. But let's think about the big picture real quick, okay? So the big picture is that we're trying to get people to engage in worship, right? So that's the main idea, is wherever people are listening, we want them to engage. And what does engaging look like? Well, most of the time, that includes them actually singing and responding along during the worship set. And then during the preaching or announcements, those are, good things that we have to have. During the announcements and the preaching, they're not distracted, or they don't have to turn their attention to something else, so that they can keep their attention on the worship service, which is pointing their attention toward Jesus, right? So, sorry, I lost my chat window for a second. There we go. So, if you're joining with us in the live broadcast, go ahead and say hi in the chat. I love seeing your names in there and seeing you guys check in when you're available. If you are working from home, go ahead and type WFH and mash that thumbs up button. I actually got to send my kids and wife out of the house this time, so I will not have any interruptions, at least from children this time. A good friend of mine just had a video where she had a saber-toothed tiger walk through the background of her live broadcast, so I'm doing something with accounting. But today I am free from that fear in the back of my mind. So let me know if you're working from home too, and if you've got kiddos around. I totally get it. That's the way life is right now. So we're trying to get people to engage in worship. And engaging in worship is responding by singing. That's what we're doing most of the time. And so we don't have to make it sound like a record, or make it sound like the big church down the street, or even the big famous church that's famous worldwide and has, millions of viewers every week. We don't have to aim for that in order to get people to engage. Most of what we're doing in making great sound for broadcast is making it so that it's not distracting and that it feels right. So there's kind of 2 categories that we'll be talking about as we go through these 3 different sections today. The dynamic range, the low frequencies, and the vocal pocket. When we're talking about those, some of them are kind of like major, like if you get this wrong, people are going to look at you sideways and start texting you. The other ones are more subtle. And so they're the little baby steps after you've got the major distractions out of the way. Then you can start to get those other things more in line and take it up a notch. So it's kind of like there's a really steep curve at first on how much work you put into how much improvement you get. And then it kind of starts to taper off, where you put in a lot more work, but you get a little bit more improvement as it goes, and you get better and better and better. But these are the kinds of things that are going to help people engage, even if they're not able to articulate to you why it does or doesn't help them engage when they're watching online. Now, I also like to talk about how people engage when they're in the room with you, because that's an important part too. I mean, I know I talk a lot about live sound on this channel, but again, that's the goal. We're trying to get people to respond in singing. I'm making another video coming up about the different musical styles and like what informs me on how I make my mix decisions and priorities to get people to engage and to sing. Because, I mean, that is my absolute favorite part. When I am mixing and I'm looking around and people are raising their hands or not, but if they're singing and I can hear them singing, that's my favorite input to listen to. So super, super pumped to be able to serve God in that way. And then I get like all these warm fuzzies when people start engaging and worshiping like that. So David Lasky, my goal is to get to 95% of good enough. I think that's even a little higher than what I think. If we're hitting 85% on most of our mixes, especially as volunteers and with a volunteer worship team, I say that's winning if you're getting to like 80% of a great mix. Those last 20% take a lot of work and a lot of team effort. So DJ, he's from Idaho, working from home. Alexis Gomez watching from Mexico. If you didn't see the last one, I gave a shout out to Mexican Coke. It's got real cane sugar, y'all. I mean, nothing else has real cane sugar other than Mexican Coke. Yes, there's Dublin Dr. Pepper, but still, thank you, Mexico, for hanging on to real cane sugar and not letting the high fructose corn syrup in. I drink it so infrequently that it doesn't really matter, but I really like the glass bottle and the Mexican Coke. So, great to have you guys with me. Love it when you guys jump in the chat and say hello. So our goal is to get people to engage, and that's with singing. And the online thing makes it harder because there's so many other distractions. You could just turn off church and go outside and play with your kids. You could switch to a different app in your phone or another tab on your computer and start looking at Facebook. It's totally possible, and it happens. It happens to me when I'm at home trying to watch church because there's a kid sleeping or whatever happens, and we didn't make it all to church. It's really hard to keep engaged, and so the more distractions you have out of the way, the better. So, number one is dynamic range. Dynamic range in live sound is your friend. Dynamic range is amazing because it draws people in because of the contrast. When you go from really quiet to really loud and then really quiet again, your loud parts don't seem as loud, or they seem more exciting, but they're not fatiguing because you had to contrast, or you had that time of people get a break with the quiet parts and you get the big parts too. So those are really helpful for mixing in live sound. And again, I like the big parts, not only because it's fun to push up the drums and the bass and you get to feel it. We'll talk about more of that in just a minute. But it's really fun because people get to feel like they can sing loud. I mean, nobody sings like really passionately, like at a whisper, unless they're forbidden from singing and they have to, right? But when you're allowed to and you can sing really passionately, you're going to sing loud. And so if things are loud around you, people can sing loud then. So that is a huge benefit for the dynamic range and the dynamic contrast in live sound. But in broadcast, the dynamic range is not awesome. And here's why. So people will not listen as loud at home on their TV or on their phone. Of course, their phone's not going to get that loud as they would if they were in the room. Partially because they're in a smaller space and it just kind of feels weird, like cranking it up to 90 dB in your house. And part of that might be that the broadcast mix is hard to get right, and so it's harder to know exactly how it feels on the other end. When it doesn't sound quite right, people don't turn it up quite as much. That's just another thing that happens. But on the whole, people are listening at much, much lower volume for the worship part of the church service. So when you switch from the worship part of the church service, which in the room might be at 85, 90 dB, and then you switch to the speaking part, which might be at like 75 dB, there's a 10 to 15 dB gap there that the level is coming down. But if the people listening at home, if they're listening at, I don't know, maybe they're listening at 80 dB, and then all of a sudden the preacher comes up and it's at 65 dB, then they're reaching for their remote and they're turning up the volume, right? That's another point where it's a distraction. Or they were kind of distracted already, and then the sound goes down and they kind of don't hear much of anything, and then their attention goes elsewhere and some distraction gets them, right? So these are the kinds of things that are real and that we're trying to combat. And so that dynamic range is one of the things that broadcast has to treat differently. There's several different ways to go about thinking about how we change our dynamic range for our broadcast. If you don't understand compression at all, you can just ride the faders up and down. So, like do what you have to do to push up the faders. Say you've got a big section of a song and everybody's, rocking out, and then it drops back down to just acoustic guitar and vocals. You just push those faders all the way up to the top and push up your master fader too. Do what you have to do to get that level up so that it's consistent level on the other end. If you understand compression, compression can really help you get stuff locked in a little better. There's places where we can compress. We can compress more on the input channels. The input channels can take a lot of compression, but they can also kind of get destroyed by compression if you try to do too much and it doesn't work that well. If you've got a little bit more of a complicated setup, you can compress groups. So you could send all your drums to a group and all your instruments to a group and all your vocals to a group and compress each one of those individually. Then you can squash some of the dynamic range out of each one of them. And then the drums don't make the vocals pump because they're on separate compressors. And then you send it to the streaming bus and that has a compressor on it. And so then you can reduce your dynamic range a little bit more. A tip for using these compressors on buses is that you can go really slow with the attack and the release time. So if you set your attack and release time to say 50 milliseconds on the attack and 1 second on the release, that's going to be like somebody riding a fader up and down for each one of those groups. Now, that might not work great on a drum bus, but for instruments and vocals, that could help balance things out really well. And I'm getting ready to do a webinar next month on how to have a hands-off broadcast mixing setup. I just debuted it as a bonus in my broadcast mixing course. But basically, the idea is you set up all these buses the right way, and with even just kind of a mediocre mix at front of house, I mean, reasonably well balanced, pretty much, okay EQ, it can sound really balanced on the other end after it goes through this multi-bus system that I describe in pretty good detail. So you know exactly what to do when you show up for the webinar. So you can keep an eye out for that. I'll be sure to send out an announcement and maybe do a post here on YouTube. So keep a lookout for that. Or to get more announcements and even to get a guide on how to stream or how to lead your church audio stream team. See what I did there? I've got a link down in the description below with a free guide that I've got there, and signing up for that, you can choose to opt into my email list and get announcements about that webinar and other stuff and videos like this if you're not already subscribed on YouTube. So if you haven't subscribed on YouTube yet and dung the little bell, why don't you just hit subscribe and ding the little bell now? And if you've already done that, why don't you just mash thumbs up if you like showing up here and hanging out with me on a Tuesday. So let me check in with the comments for just a second. Yeah, people complain. David Lasky, I get it. Live stream was awful and audio should be turned off for music. Ouch. Then I had old ladies telling me it was bad. That's another thing, David. I hear you on that. I hear your pain. It's hard to do it right. And people will complain a lot. Somebody's going to complain about something, right? So it's good advice as a sound tech to develop thicker skin or to be able to hear someone's comments without taking them personally and being able to address what it is that they're saying, even if they're kind of grumpy about it. So I hear you on that. All right. So, very good. So, dynamic range is one of our big distractions that we have to eliminate in broadcast. Okay, so if you don't take anything away from this video other than that, know that dynamic range and having people chase their volume knob up and down on their broadcast, you want to avoid that. So take that away if you want. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the vocal pocket. The vocal pocket is how far in front of the mix the vocal is. So if the band feels like it's back here, right, and the vocal feels like it's up here, how far in front of the band does the vocal feel like it is? And that's our level between the vocal and the band. We call that the vocal pocket. So everybody say with me, vocal pocket. Because it's kind of like you got a shirt and you want to just tuck it in the pocket right there. You don't want it like way out here. You don't want it behind you. You want it right there in that front shirt pocket for everybody to see with your pocket protector, because you're a nerd, and nerds, it's the age of the nerd right now, actually. So we just have to learn how to be creative and emotionally intelligent nerds. But yeah, nerds kind of win right now. So this is a feel thing, and you have to learn it. So if you have Spotify or Apple Music, I've got 2 songs I want you to listen to. The first one is basically any song from Norah Jones' first album, Come Away With Me. You can listen to Come Away With Me, Nightingale, Don't Know Why, any of those songs. The vocal is way out in front. It's out there. It's really out there. But her singing is so good that it feels right? So that's okay, but that's one extreme of the vocal pocket. The other track I want you to go listen to is Message in a Bottle by Sting and the Police. On that one, it's a punk record from the 80s. So the vocal is way tucked back in the mix, right? It's way back there, and the guitars are like way out here, and the snare drum is like right here, which is awesome because it's Stuart Copeland, and he just kills it. So those are the 2 bookends, right? So if you're having trouble understanding what I mean by the vocal pocket, that's what I mean. There's a range where we have to balance the level of the band, mostly the instruments, like the mid-range instruments, like your guitars, keyboards, the stuff that's playing rhythm stuff. We have to balance that and the vocal level. And so when you get it wrong, here's what happens. When you get it wrong and the vocal's too far back, right? The vocal's way back here, right? People are going to complain to you and they'll be like, I can't hear the vocal, right? Because they can't, and it's what they have to sing along with. And yes, they should be complaining. When it's too far out in front, they won't tell you, but they'll feel like it's off, right? So it's going to feel disconnected, or like if you close your eyes, you just imagine this big talking head right in front of you, and that's all you can hear. And then there's like a band somewhere back there, right? So the vocal pocket is really, really tricky to get right, especially if you're in headphones. So if you've got a mix in headphones, if that's the only thing you can adjust with, headphones are a liar, because you hear so much detail that it's hard to tell when something's buried, because you can hear every detail of its nuance because the speakers are this far from your ears, right? In-ear monitors are just as bad, right? You can hear so much detail that it makes it really, really difficult to tell what the difference is on the level relationships. So even if you've just got a little junky speaker to listen to, junky speakers actually will make you feel more like you've got your vocal further out in front than you do. So if you get a little like cheap boombox or something, that's going to enhance the vocal because it's basically just mid-range. It's going to make the vocal feel like it's further out in front. So here's a little test. If you can put on the headphones and the vocal doesn't seem like it's too far out in front or too far in back, which not great, but sometimes you just have headphones and a junky speaker. Then you check on the junky speaker and the vocal sounds like it's too far out in front. That's how you know you're kind of in the ballpark for the vocal to band relationship. And When I say band relationship, I'm really talking about the mid-range instruments, because you really want to have your drums like really up there and cranking as much as you can. The other thing about dynamic range is we can't have all the punch that we want, right? So we've got to try to tame those transients down. And I talk about that more in another video. You can go watch that's in this same playlist. So this video is in a playlist called Broadcast Mixing Videos or Tutorials or something. There's other videos that talk about how we can try to tame the transients, how we shift our attack time on our compressors for our drums to lend itself better to getting our level up on our streaming mix. So that's another thing that you can think about and check out. So vocals too far in the front, nobody's going to complain, but it's going to feel weird. Vocals too far in back, people are going to start texting you immediately, and you're going to get a mouthful from the pastor or somebody like, they can't hear the vocals. The vocals are the real thing. You know, it's going to come as a flood. So just be warned. Put on your thick skin for people complaining, because you're going to get it wrong while you're learning, and people are going to complain, and you're just going to have to get used to it. I've been doing this for 19 years, and still people complain. So sometimes you cannot make everybody happy. Yes, they're complaining about things that I choose to do. It's not usually mistakes. Sometimes it's mistakes. Or they're in a seat that has a lot of bass and they don't want a lot of bass. Well, I can't fix that. They just need to move seats. But that's another topic for another time. So that brings us actually to the low end, because it's all about the low end. When you get that right, everything else falls into place. Now, you can buy t-shirts that have that on it. You can buy t-shirts that say Sound Ninja on it. But what does it really mean for the low end to be right? Well, in live sound, the low end should be felt to some extent. And this is hugely dependent on what your congregation wants and can tolerate and expects. If you've got an older congregation, they usually don't want to feel it so much. So right for them might be a little bit less low frequencies than what you really want, right? You might really crave feeling it, and I get it. I crave that feeling too. I love it when the bass just like thumps my chest. I'm feeling it. Every bit of me is moving with every air molecule and every pluck of that bass string, and I'm like, yes! I love it. But sometimes you just have to get the low end to fill it out and give it some support, right? When you have a mix that lacks enough low end, what ends up happening is it feels thin, and if you try to go loud, it feels louder than it actually is. So that's kind of a problem, in that you don't want it to feel louder without getting all the benefit of it being louder, right? So actually you push up the low end again and okay, this doesn't feel so bad, because the balance of the frequencies that your ear is hearing, if you're hearing mostly, mids and highs, your ear thinks, oh, this is harsh. You add in the lows and your ear's like, oh, this is pleasant and balanced. Same level, different low end balance, different results in your brain. And it's all about feel. So, and you've only got one room to mix in. One. There's only one spot where you have to get the low end right, or one area, because it's going to be different from spot to spot. So you get to choose there, and you get to feel it, and what you push up and what you feel is what you've got, right? Low end on a broadcast is an illusion. And hopefully that worked. You cannot quite get it right because people are listening on phones, right? They've got a little tiny speaker. All right, let me dig my phone out of my pocket and show you. Okay. Do you see this speaker right here? This. That's what they're trying to produce low frequencies with. But in live sound, we've got speakers that are this big trying to produce low frequencies. So how are you going to compete with that? And the answer is that you're not. You have to make the illusion that there's something going on with the low frequencies when you're mixing for broadcast, right? So I've got some specific steps I can give you for trying to get better low end for your broadcast mix. And if you're mixing front of house and broadcast at the same time, maybe you make these changes, and even if it's not exactly what you want, you're compromising a little bit on your live system to get a better result on your broadcast system. So the first one is on the kick drum. You're going to make sure that you've got enough beater sound from the kick drums, right? So the smack of the pedal on the head, you want to get that to come out, because if that's missing that, you're not going to have any indication for your ear to grab onto that, oh, there's the downbeat, right? So that smack from the kick drum is important for telling your ear, oh, there's a thump there too. That's also helpful in live sound, but it's more critical when you're mixing broadcast. When you have a broadcast mix, even if somebody is listening on something that's got some low end, they probably don't have the 40 hertz or 50 hertz that you want to boost up for your subs, but they might have 70 or 80. That's a lot more likely. So if you can move the frequency of your kick drum from 40 hertz and you move that boost up to like 80 hertz, 75, 80, then that can help make that translate a little bit better. So people say, oh, there's some thump from the kick drum. Okay, I got that now. That's really helpful. On the bass guitar, I like to emphasize the frequency range around 200 hertz, and I like to make a nice wide boost there. One pro tip, if you haven't seen this in my other videos, is that we boost wide and we cut narrow. So those are going to be able to get you more pleasing and more natural sounding EQ changes when you cut narrow and boost wide. So with a wide boost right around 200, there's all the overtones in the bass that your ear actually adds in fundamental frequencies when it hears all the overtones of something. So adding in that nice warm bass makes you think, oh, this is really full, even if you're listening on, speaker this size, right? So that can be helpful and another little trick for you. If you're in a place where you can use plugins, there's a Waves plugin called R-Bass, or the older version of it is called Max Bass. And that basically synthesizes the overtones of lower frequencies. So you add it and it makes it feel like that sub bass is much bigger without it actually having to have the level there be pushed up so much. So that can be another handy trick to get more feeling of low end, even when you've got a smaller speaker. It's an incredible tool and I really like it. One advantage, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole for just a second. One advantage that I like Max Bass a little bit more than R-Bass is Max Bass has this dynamic component to it. And so it's kind of like an upward expander on the like Max Bass overtones kind of stuff. So when you've got a kick drum and it's hitting, you can actually get those overtones to expand a little bit more too. So it gives more of a feeling of punch than if you're just using R-Bass or something. So that's a little freebie. If you've got that as part of your bundle, you might try that next time instead of R-Bass. All right. Bunny trail over. So next up, okay. This is also related to dynamic range and level, but if you can use compression to your advantage and keep the level up, the louder your mix sounds, right? So the more level that you're sending, without clipping, of course, the bigger it's going to sound, right? So when people turn it up and down a bunch, they're adjusting the way that their ears will perceive the low frequencies. So you can do this test in your car, listen to the chorus, the chorus of a song, and then crank it up like one notch and listen to the chorus again. And that one little notch will make your ear be like, oh, there's more bass now, right? Your ears are not equally sensitive to all frequencies. And that balance even changes based on the intensity that you're mixing at or that you're listening at. So the hotter you have your mix or the more compressed you have your bass, if your bass is staying in one place and you've got it really well compressed, that constant level of low end will make it feel like there's more consistently. So that can be helpful as well. So when people are listening on small devices, these low end changes make a very little difference, right? It's hard to really get a lot of change in the low end from these phones. I mean, our bass is helpful. Excuse me, my water bottle squeaked. You can hear those changes, but it's not going to make it like a drastic difference. But when low end really matters in your broadcast mix is when people are listening on something that has a little bit more of a low frequency reproduction. That can be really helpful because, well, it can help them feel it a little bit more, which is always a plus. People want to feel it, right? They just want to. But if it's wrong and you've got too much low end, or it feels flubby, or it's out of control and kind of feels blown out on the bottom end, that's when people say, ugh, this feels weird and it's distracting. And there's actually a phenomenon called masking where low frequencies will mask higher frequencies. So you can make things less intelligible by boosting too much low end. So that's your other nerd freebie for today. So that's also something to keep in mind. You really want to make your low end to try to be as even as possible. But there are some enemies that you've got to overcome when trying to get really even low end. The first one is that if you're in the same room as subs from the live sound system, forget about it. You're not going to be able to perceive with your ears and headphones and really hear the changes when the rest of your body is tactily, I don't know what that word is, feeling the low frequencies from the subs. You're not going to be able to get it right very well that way. You'd have to really concentrate and really be able to disconnect what you're feeling in your chest cavity from what's happening in your monitors or your headphones. So that's tricky. If you can get to some place where you're not hearing the bass to try to dial that in, that's helpful. If you're already in a quiet room, headphones or in-ear monitors that are nice and flat are super helpful because then you're not dealing with room acoustics anomalies. If you've never experienced this, go ahead and play a 100 hertz tone or a 50 hertz tone through a speaker in a small room or even a large room. It's kind of fun that way too. But as you move around, you will hear how the bass goes in and out, and you'll hear this, ooh. It's so weird. But can you imagine trying to get the low end right when you've got all these tones where the level from place to place is going up and down? So you move your head a little bit and the balance that you just fixed is now out of balance. You want to eliminate all that. So don't even try that if you don't have really great acoustics or you don't really know the low end in that room really well in your sweet spot with your monitors. If you've got all that worked out, great. But for really dialing in the low end, turn down the monitors, put on the headphones that you trust. I like these Audio-Technica ATH M50X headphones. X means detachable cable. So those are helpful. They are a little bit hyped in the bottom end, but you have to learn them to learn what they should sound like with really great sounding music. So then when you can know what to try to match when you're mixing your stuff. And making sure that the kick and the bass are locked in, right? The kick is having the punch, the bass has the sustain, right? That's what you want to get for a great low end. You want to make sure that it's not cluttered up with too much low, like power chord guitars or something, or the keyboard player isn't sending you a pad that's got a sub octave on it that you didn't realize that was there, and that's cluttering things up. So you're making room in the low end for different stuff, and that can be really helpful. Very cool. So I am checking comments now. Where do you get Mexican Coca-Cola? Hey, Noel, good to see you, man. I get Mexican Coca-Cola at Costco, or you can get it at many like Mexican and Hispanic markets. I found them here in Missouri. But I like to get the 24-pack from Costco. It is often one of my birthday or Christmas presents from my kids because they know that I love it. Yes, Matthew Ryan, our bass is for the win. It's just helpful to have. It goes well on a lot of different stuff. David Pound, good to see you, man. Glad you're here now. Very cool. All right. Not me. He says, I check the device intended and check mix in mono on Oratones. That's a great plan. Oratones are these little tiny speakers. I think they're like 3-4 inch speakers. And they sound like trash, but it's brilliant trash, right? It's really, really close to what your phone is going to sound like. If you only have one set of speakers, but you want to emulate what one of those speakers sounds like, you can put an EQ on your monitor bus. Don't put this on the whole stereo bus, right? You're going to mess stuff up and make everybody's bandwidth go to whoop, and then you'll get texts and emails about what happened in that song when it suddenly all the top end and low end went away, right? So filter off the top end and the bottom end. I don't know, high pass filter up to 150, 200, somewhere around there. Low pass filter at like 4K maybe go down to 2K. You put that in and suddenly you've got a phone and that's what you're listening to. You've got a frequency limited device and that can be really helpful for figuring out what's going on in the mid-range, because the top end, the bottom end, they can be really distracting for getting those mid-range frequencies just right. And that's really where the key to your mix really gelling is in the mid-range. When you can get certain things notched out of some instruments that's masking something else, if you can get the vocal feeling just right all the way through the mids, say from like, 200 up to 4K, if you can get that really, really well balanced, and if you can make enough room with your instruments for your vocals, right, so that they're not taking up space that's critical for vocal intelligibility or vocal energy, right? When you get a little carving out of that, that can really work to get your mixes sounding more polished. So, that's all I got for my notes today. I'm going to keep checking on the comments. If you guys have any questions, drop them in there. I'm happy to hang out. Okay, remember that compression is added between the device and the stations and satellite feeds. That's where we get toasted. So I've had some people talk to me about this lately. So after it leaves your console or leaves the video encoder, what is YouTube and Facebook doing to it? And I've tried reaching out to a friend that knows people at Facebook, didn't find anything that way, but I'm trying to figure out what audio processing they're doing on their end. And to the best of my knowledge, I could be wrong, but this is what I think. If you're going to Facebook or YouTube and you're using more of the webcam feature, my guess is they're putting an overall compression on there to try to tame the dynamic range, as if you're talking into like a Yeti microphone, right? And they want to help you get the level up so that it's not like, super low levels and you can't understand it, right? I think they're doing that on Facebook and on YouTube if you're just going through the webcam interface. That's my guess. I could be wrong. If I am, great. The other thing that Facebook and YouTube are doing, even if you're going through a streaming interface, so if you're going through OBS like I'm doing right now, or vMix or whatever else, you've got a stream key and it's ported all the way over there. If you're doing that, my guess is they're assuming that you're doing a little bit more processing to your audio, and so then they don't do any processing except this. I do know that they are limiting the overall output level, and they're measuring it in LUFS, or LUFS, or loudness units full scale. It's kind of like a frequency weighted RMS signal that the European Union and the the Audio Engineering Society in the US, or the European Broadcasting Union. Please excuse me, all you Europeans, for messing up your acronym. They came up with a standard for how to measure loudness for digital signals, because peak signal metering doesn't really work and the VU meter isn't really being used all that much anymore. So they came up with this other way of doing it called loudness units full scale. And I think their max level is -14 or -16. I can't remember who does what. Spotify has one, YouTube has one, Facebook has one. I don't remember who's where. But basically, if you go above that, they're just going to like pull you down. So if you have this like smoking hot CD mastered mix that's like, always touching at like negative 0.1 dBFS, and it's super slammed all the time, they're just going to knock that entire level down so that your average is negative 14. The other thing that trips people up when they're doing their streaming is sometimes they'll have the data compression on their stream set a little too low. So I don't know why, but like if your thing by default is defaulted to 128 kilobits per second, that's really going to limit your dynamic range, right? It's going to chop off the low level signals that give you the detail. It's going to chop off the top end. It's going to chop off the bottom end. You're really going to be frequency limited by your audio bandwidth. So your video is already using probably 10 times the bandwidth of what your audio is using already. So the higher you can kick up your audio bit rate, the better. So the minimum that I would go to is 192. If you can get up to 256 or 320, go for that. And you'll notice, again, these aren't like deal breakers, but they can be marginally better than just running at at stuff. But 128 is going to be really, really bad sounding. Stream services. Richard Lombana asks, what online audio training do you recommend to get our team up to speed, like Worship U, Church Mix, etc.? I only have experience with a couple platforms. I have a couple I have one class and I'm planning another class on production online. That's run by Luke Hendrickson and Isaac Meyer. They have a lot of classes on a lot of different stuff. I have a class there on phase because I could go a little nerdy and go pretty deep on the nerdy stuff. And that's been great. But I actually have 3 different classes, 2 of which are going to be opening again in the next several months. For church sound techs, and it's designed specifically for you guys. The first one is Mixing Foundations, and that covers the basics of like setting up the stage, knowing what the speakers should do, and then all the basic mixing tools that you need to use in order to get a pretty good mix going so that you can keep growing, right? I don't go over every detail possible or else nobody would finish the course. But it gets you a great head start in mixing. And that class I had available. I opened up registration about a month ago. And in the next couple months, I'll be opening it again. The other class I have that's going to be opening again soon, I think in January, is broadcast mixing. And that covers some of the basics too. So if you're brand new and don't know anything or have never taken anything or gotten any formal training, or even the training that you have has been kind of lousy, it covers a lot of the basics too, but it focuses mostly on making a great broadcast mix. And I think they're great because I made them. And I thought, what does everybody need to know? This stuff, and I put it in there. And I'm continually updating it and adding new lessons and trying to improve it. So the courses get you lifetime access. I don't have like a certain specific amount of time, or you only have a year to do this. But if you get the guide down in the description below, the How to Lead Your Church Audio Stream Team, you'll be on the email list if you opt in, of course. Thank you, European Union, to hear more information about those courses. I also have a third one called Amateur to Pro, and I had that registration open back a month ago. But I'm thinking about saving that mostly for more of a hands-on, more face-to-face, like time with me training program, more like coaching or training the trainer. So if you're, like a video person and you're having to learn audio to train audio people, or if you're all of a sudden in charge of a big sound system and you're happy to help, but you're a little over your head, this goes over and touches on all the technical details in a bunch of different areas so that you can know how to address those topics. But for most of you that are probably watching this, Mixing Foundations and Broadcast Mixings are going to be great courses. I have them under the Worship Sound Wisdom banner because it's not just about knowing the techniques. knowing the tools, but you have to apply it with wisdom because we're dealing with people, we're dealing with music, and imagine this with me. Like, imagine there's a new restaurant that opens, and this chef is the best knife sharpener in the world, and he has the most precise oven down to 1/10 of a degree, but he doesn't know how to combine flavors very well, right? So you can know all the tech and all the techniques for getting everything technically perfect. But if you don't have the creative part down, if you don't have the part that makes people enjoy it, it's, what's the point? So that's why I want to teach you guys wisdom to go along with the tech and the techniques, so that you can apply it in a way that makes sense, that gets people great results and makes people happy when they're listening to worship music. So there we go. Here we go. All right. So, okay. I'm seeing some comment stuff about the LUFS, and I got a question about this, I think in email, just the other day or just today. There's a difference between LUFS, loudness units full scale, and the digital meter that you're going to see on like this console, or like the peak meter that you're going to see if you're running in like a Blackmagic A10 Mini, and you're seeing that digital meter. Those meters are showing you DBFS, or digital full scale. So that's showing you the peak levels, where these loudness units full scales are showing you more average levels. So if you do all your compression well, everything, even if you're not doing your compression really, really well, on the peak meters, I like to aim for -6 dBFS. This gives me a little bit of headroom, and it gets the level up enough. If you have a limiter that you can, go higher than that safely, great. But I'm not usually mixing into a limiter, and I try to keep things simple for people. So aiming for -6, that's kind of my target. And that question came through email. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. It's always wonderful being with you guys. I really enjoy seeing you guys blow up the comments and connect with each other in the chat. If you're watching via replay, go ahead and type Team Replay in the comments below. Mash that thumbs up. If you haven't, hit subscribe and ding the little bell, because it's all about the low end. Nobody leaves church humming the kick drum, and do what you can to avoid the sound tech solo. And one more thing. Remember, I can't believe it. Remember that broadcast is an illusion. So, thank you for watching. God bless you guys. This is James signing off. Peace.